Hi, everybody. Welcome again to another episode of the ShopNotes Podcast. I'm your host, Phil Huber. Today's episode is number 78, joined by Logan and John, as always, back from vacation, so that the band is back together. I hope you enjoy today's show.
This episode of the ShopNotes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Magazine. Woodsmith Magazine has been the trusted source for all your woodworking information for over 40 years. From tips and techniques to furniture projects to shop projects, you'll find it all at Woodsmith Magazine. Subscribe today at woodsmith.com.
So, if we were a band, what stereotypical band people would we be? Like, Phil would be the front man?
I think, is the drummer usually like the weird one?
I think so.
Like kind of the weird outcast?
Yeah.
That'd probably be me then.
I feel like I'd be the guy that'd be like crowd surfing, probably too drunk to stand on the stage.
Yeah,
Or I'm
doesn't
just like
show up
on
to practice.
bass.
Yep, basically.
I could be
That's
a backup dancer.
Nobody wants to see that.
You know what? They're going to see it.
Maybe they do want to see. It's one of those things where you do want to see it, but you're just never going to admit that.
Nobody.
You're not going to unsee it, that's for sure.
Nope.
So, yeah, so this is the first time I think we've all been together in about a month.
Yeah,
Between all the vacations and...
because I think you were gone for, 2 podcasts
Yep.
prior to, and then I was out.
Yep.
Let me tell you, there's a reason that they call it Swamp East, Missouri.
Yeah. Yeah.
No offense to my family that lives down there, because I had a blast with them. But, here in Iowa, because of all, and this is what a lot of people from other parts of the country don't necessarily understand. So this is our geography portion of today's show, is that even though Iowa is in the northern part of the nation and the Midwest, it gets pretty humid here, and that has to do with corn.
Mm-hmm.
Because corn transpires a lot of moisture into the air, so it gets pretty humid.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is like a whole nother level of humid down in that part of Missouri.
Yeah.
Even though the percentages are about the same, like I've experienced, X percent humidity here. Down there, I don't know what it is. They have a different logarithmic scale as to what percentages of humidity they can accomplish.
Yeah.
Because it's
Yeah,
like
humid-
spooning the air and just
Humid
having to,
heat
eat
is like a whole nother ball game that people from Arizona and Las Vegas and that area don't understand. Because we had Jimmy Cluse here from Las Vegas last week, and what'd he say? He got out of the shower and dried off, and then 2 seconds later he's wet again.
Yeah, he came upstairs. I'm making coffee, and he's like, Jimmy being English, he's like, bloody hell, I can't get dry. I was like, what do you mean? And he said, I got out of the shower, dried off, walked to the room, got dressed, walked upstairs, and I'm just as wet as when I got out of the shower. It's like, yeah, stuff doesn't evaporate here near as quickly as back out in Vegas.
Yeah, so. I was gone in mid-June to Central Florida, the swamps of Orlando, and it was hot and humid down there in the 90s and rained every day, and it was pretty miserable. But then I looked at the weather for Iowa, and it's like, I'm glad I'm not there, because it was hotter and humider, if that's a word, here. So, yeah, the Midwest has a whole different ball game when it comes to weather, so...
Yeah. Well, I don't know. This week's pretty nice, though. It's cooling off a little bit.
Right. And we've had a few days of clouds to kind of temper that a little bit. So,
yeah. And I'm actually taking off for vacation this afternoon, and we're going northwest to Rushmore, which it's supposed to be warm, right? I mean, in the Dakotas, you kind of get the same temperature we have here. But what it appears, and people that are from the Dakotas could probably correct me if I'm wrong, is there's a much bigger temperature swing. So, like, the nights are much cooler than they are here. So yeah, it may still get to the 80s or 90s during the day, but they're still dropping into the 50s at night. It's kind of like the desert where it gets really cold at night but really hot during the day. I don't know why that is, but even though it's supposed to be like mid 80s when we're there, it's still supposed to be dropping down to like 55 at night. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can deal with that. Open up the camper windows, turn the fans on, and suck some cool air inside.
Right.
So, but yeah.
And that concludes our podcast for the day. Weather report.
Wow, you can do that.
I sure can do. I've been waiting. I've been hovering over that button this entire 6 minutes we've been on
If
here.
you were thinking like John is going to say something,
I know
that needs a rim shot.
Yep. Yep. So no. Speaking of humidors, this brings up an interesting. We didn't really have a plan for today. Everybody's thinking, you guys have a plan for regular podcasts? No, not usually.
Nope.
We do not. This made me think of something, though. So I showed you guys something that I was working on, testing out yesterday a little bit. So one of the upcoming projects I'll be working on for Popular Woodworking is going to be a humidor. We're speaking about humidity, right? So a humidor. And my plan right now for this humidor is to do some like heavily burned and textured exterior on the box to kind of give it like a nice tactile feel. It gives it a really dull black color, good texture. And this is something that Jimmy and I were talking about last week when he was here. What's your guys' opinion on when does something no longer become woodworking and it becomes more art? Or is it a very blurry line? So, and in particular, we were talking about a gentleman that lives in Ireland by the name of Pat Carroll. And Pat is an extremely talented woodturner, and Pat is very, very artistic with some of his stuff he does. And Jim and I were sitting on the deck one night drinking some Guinness because he's obviously from England and that's what he drinks. And we had a philosophical debate about when does wood turning or woodworking in general, let's just say woodworking in general, stop being woodworking because more of the effort and more of the technique went into the finishing and artistic side of it than the woodworking side.
I'd say when I can no longer draw it in our 3D modeling program of Inventor, that's when it's art. I'm turning it over to an artist to draw.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Because I can't dimension that or draw it, extrude it, any of that stuff. Now it's art.
Okay.
That's to me. That's my engineering brain.
Okay.
So
you want to be able to CAD program draw it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That's one way.
Yeah.
I guess and it's funny because I've listened to several podcasts and other discussions on the same topic, not necessarily related to woodworking either. And I guess for me, the difference relates to its physical practicality. In the sense that there are pieces of woodworking that are ostensibly furniture, but it's a chair, but you would never sit in it and it would never be comfortable.
Okay.
And the way I say it, physical practicality, is because it's not that art has no use. It's just that the function of art is different than
it's not a physical thing.
A physical practicality or physical function, in the sense that you can have a ornately turned art bowl or platter on a lathe, but you are never gonna eat your cereal out of it.
Sure.
And that's not its point. Its point is for its
Aesthetics.
visual beauty.
Yep.
And how that feeds you, as opposed to the fact that it holds your corn pops and feeds you that way.
Okay.
So that whether that's turning, because I've seen some things where it's like a turned vessel, but it's made out of a burl and there's 48,000 holes in it. And unless you're using it to hold, extremely large objects, it's not going to hold liquid. You're not going to be able to put flowers in it and pour water on it. So I look at it that way.
Okay.
In the same way I would view furniture. Like furniture, woodworking in a wider scope. Like,
sure.
If you're calling it something, can it be used for that function well?
Okay.
And that means that there's stuff that's meant for low or not low, but there's roughly made things, utilitarian things that you let your kids play with, or it's a firewood box or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also higher, more refined work that requires a higher level of skill or detail or finishing or whatever, because it's fancy. It's you have your Chinette paper plates for when you're having a cookout, and you have your china that you bring out on anniversaries and Christmas dinner and things like that.
Yeah. We've had this discussion before. Like, everybody knows that listens regularly knows I'm a Thomas Mosher fanboy, and we've talked before about how Thomas Mosher furniture generally, in a broad sense, is for people. The people that buy Thomas Mosher furniture are for people that don't really use the furniture. Like, right? I mean, we've said that before, where it's like, somebody on the East Coast in a big, a nice big, 1700s house has a big dining room. They put a Thomas Mosher dining table and chairs in there, and they might eat at it once a year. I mean, it's that type of thing. Now, it's completely utilitarian, but, whether it's price that makes it not be their everyday thing, or that just their lifestyle doesn't lend itself to using it every day. And now that we're discussing this, I started thinking about Pat Carroll's website in particular. And I think a lot of stuff he does is he actually labels as, sculpture. And I don't know that he actually labels it as, wood turning. I mean, his website is patcarrollwoodturning.com.
Yeah.
But he has a lot of different series or lines that he makes that are they're not necessarily utilitarian. He has an erosion series that he does. It's absolutely beautiful. It's something you would put on your shelf and not use. It's decoration. I mean, in the sense that it's a turned hollow form. So think of a round globe that's completely hollow, and then he pierces it to where it's very, very thin, and then he goes through and does a finishing technique on it where it looks like it is rusted metal. It just looks like it is a wire cage of rusted metal. Super cool, beautiful. I would love to own one. I'd love to learn the technique from Pat, but this is where Jamie and I started talking, is like, where do you draw the line? Because that's wood turning. That's the root and the stem of what he is doing. He is turning that out of wood, and every experienced and good wood turner will tell you can do whatever finishing technique you want on something, but you have to start with a good shape. So you have to start with that fundamental wood turning to a good shape. But then the wood turning just becomes the medium for your, artistic outlet or whatever you're doing.
Right.
So it's just an interesting debate. It's almost along the lines of, is CNC woodworking or not? It's like you can make an argument either way, but it was an interesting thought or topic. And I've started to be much more interested in that side of woodworking. the more artistic side. I mean, I like the functionality stuff. I don't ever want to. I don't want to ever make stuff that just hangs on the wall, but I do like doing wall hangings and stuff. But I like elevating what I'm making to a little bit higher degree than just sanded and finished shellacked wood, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just interesting. So, Phil, question for you. Is Intarsia woodworking or is it art?
I would call it woodworking, or I would call it art.
Okay.
And wood is the medium on it.
See, and that I guess that's kind of exactly how I would put some of these really well-known turners that do stuff like that.
Right.
They're artists. Some people call themselves wood artists.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean,
yeah.
You know, because you can have, you know, there's fiber arts and, you know, pottery and that kind of thing. So,
yeah.
And I don't disparage it. It's not something that I'm interested in personally.
Sure.
I'd like to see how people do stuff. You know, like we've done some judging at the Iowa State Fair, and there are some extremely talented woodworkers in the state here that exhibit at the fair. Mm-hmm. And it's a lot of fun to see that kind of stuff and to, you know, be able to see it up close and to handle it, to get an appreciation of how it was done. You know, and there's a lot of them where you start to do much more complex finishing on them, that there is a real practical understanding of chemistry and color theory and all that kind of stuff to be able to get some of those effects that are created. Again, it's just not something that I do, but I don't.
Well, you know, I would almost, this is a discussion you could take anywhere, but I would almost lean, you know, that marquetry is the same type of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it's still art, but with wood as the medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, could you build a federal table without any inlay? Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm. Is it really federal then? I don't know.
Yeah.
But so.
Yeah, you definitely still need to know or be masterful of all the woodworking techniques and finishing and stuff to get to that point. So it's definitely not a lower form of woodworking at all. It's just less utilitarian. So
yeah. I'm going to start referring to all my woodworking as utilitarian because then people can't pick out flaws. It's like, no, it's just utilitarian.
Right.
Take that.
It's a design choice. You can't criticize it.
Or if you call it art, I mean, you can't criticize it.
It's true.
Right.
It's just a piece of art. I mean, you know, it's just free form. You know?
Yeah.
There's no
free
mistakes.
Form tear out. We're letting the wood tell us what it wants to do.
Right.
Yeah. It's about how it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm. That was my topic for the day. John, you're up with your topic of the day.
Oh, well, I was talking to Logan before we got started. He asked what I was doing in the shop, and I said I was working on that reader's tip that was turning a junk grill into a shop cart or tool stand. And when I first saw this, I thought, you know, that's the dumbest idea ever. And then as I thought about it and you see all these grills on the curb where people are throwing away junk grills. And it's like, maybe it's a decent idea. And then when I pulled a grill off the curb and got it in here and stripped it down, it's like, you know what? I'm left with the solid base here and casters. That's usually kind of the more expensive piece of hardware when you're putting together a mobile cart in the shop, and it's got those things. So good bones to start with, and add a couple pieces of plywood, and I got a decent planer stand or shop cart. So, you know, maybe it's a good idea. So I don't know if you guys ever seen something like, oh, that's dumb. And then as you think about it more, get into it and get creative with your own ideas, you're like, you know what? That was a pretty good idea. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm experiencing.
I actually texted you guys about that a couple of weeks ago. I was working on that toolbox. I saw Chris Fitch put a router upside down in his bench vise. And I'm like, that's dumb, Chris. There's a router table sitting right there. Like, why are you doing that to that poor colt? That looks dangerous. And then I started doing it. I'm like, this is phenomenal. Like this, it looks like the dumbest thing in the world, but oh my God, it works so well.
Yeah, I admit to doing that too, because I had my router table already set up in my shop for a particular operation that I needed to come back to. And I didn't want to tear down that setup and do something and then just go back to it. So I took my other router that I have, which is a Porter Cable 690, so a little bigger router. Mm-hmm. And I think it was just like a chamfer bit like you had, or a round over bit. Yeah. And I had relatively small pieces on there, was using it off the bearing. And at first you're like, this just feels wrong in so many ways. But, you know, router table is just basically an upside down router.
That's all it is.
If you can get a solid grip on it with your bench vise without crushing it.
Yep.
You know, and it worked like a champ for what I was doing. So
yeah, it's dumb how some stuff like that just works.
Yeah.
There was something else I was doing in the video studio, and I know you were in there, Phil, and I was like, I hate myself for saying this, but God, this works so well. And I can't remember what it was, but it was something I was doing, and I was like, oh, this is so stupid that it works so freaking well. I don't remember what it was, but that was. It'll come to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done the same thing as far as clamping stuff in vices, like with the palm sander. If you're trying to sand like really tiny pieces where there's no way to really hold it and put the palm sander down on it, you know, clamp the palm sander upside down in the vise, and then you can kind of hold it down on the sandpaper, and works great.
So it's like a small surface sander kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep. So.
And we've had, I don't know how many tips submitted on creating some kind of a holder for your sander to do just that.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
You know, one is that's technique related for me is doweling, using dowels to join frameworks or case pieces. And I think my hesitancy comes from having assembled far too many ready-to-assemble flat pack furniture pieces from college days, or, you know, I think I've helped set up a couple of offices, you know, and there's just a lot of that kind of furniture out there. Yeah.
Doweled particle board and quick fit.
Yeah, and it's really, you know, the dowels in those things are really indexing structures. And I was reading a couple of James Krenoff books, and putting those two together, I thought that Krenoff was a nut on trying to think that doweling would actually work. And then just over time, there were a couple of projects where I needed two pieces to register together and be connected, and I didn't know how else to do it. So I made a couple of simple doweling jigs and used those, and it's like, oh. And then since then, I've put together a couple of other things, you know, being more deliberate in the technique with it, and it's like, oh, this really does work. And I also always thought that in order to use dowels to join, say, case pieces or edge joints on a board or something like that, that you had to have superhuman precision in order to get everything lined up. You know, because if you have like a 4-foot glue up and you try and you put multiple dowels in there, each one of them has to be perfect for any of them to work. And it's really not that difficult to do.
No, and I think I agree exactly. Like what you're saying is exactly right. You think that you have these rigid dowels that if they're not perfectly spaced, it won't go together. And that is true to some degree, but I think there's enough flex in the dowels and the wood fibers compress enough that you can be off slightly and it will still go together.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I've put dowels in something, squirted glue on everything. I was like, oh, shoot, I probably should have made sure these fit before I glued everything. And I'm like, well, it's too late now. And you start beating it together and it goes. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because I'm working on that cabinet for my sister, and I have several parts on there and the internal structure where I have the pieces joined together with dowels. And it was that same thing where you have this, tightening in your chest that all of these need to line up perfectly. And after doing the drilling, there's that moment of truth when you try and bring the pieces together, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, well, if you're careful,
Yep.
It really does work. And I will say that there are a lot of crap dowel jigs out there.
Yeah. That
aren't meant for quality joinery without being super fussy with it. But, if you take your time on it, using a good bit, a good drill, and a decent doweling jig, even if it's a doweling jig you make, you can do it. And I think the difference between flat pack furniture dowels and fine furniture doweling is just the number of dowels you use.
Yeah.
Instead of having like 3 across an 8-inch wide glue up, you need 10.
Yep. Well, and it's like, I think I mentioned this when I was building that poker table a year ago. I used pieces of all thread as dowels on the miter joints. So I'm like, oh, it's, epoxy can grip it. It's strong. They're heavy pieces. And the same thing. I made my own doweling jig that registered against the outside corner of the miters. So you're referencing off the same reference surface, the top and the outside corner of each side of the joint. And I mean, it works phenomenally. And if you, like you said, if you take your time and do it, it works.
Right.
So.
Yep. And then you can always just wallow out the hole and use more glue or epoxy if it doesn't.
That's right.
So do you have a specific purpose for the grill cart, John, that you're building into it?
I was kind of leaning towards like a planer stand.
Oh, okay.
But, as I'm getting into it, I have a lot more ideas of like, oh, you could use this as a, sharpening station where, you have your grinder on it and, you're sharpening stuff and, or turning it into a router table would be another great way to use it. It's the cart or the base that I have is a little low, so you'd have to build up the top a little bit to get it up to a height that I would be comfortable with, but it's definitely usable in that manner. So, I mean, you can go lots of different directions, but
yeah,
just trying to keep it general purpose for now
right.
And see where it goes from there. So.
Cool. That'll be fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing, when I was on vacation, I got to go through a couple of antique malls when I was down there, which was a lot of fun. I like going through them periodically. And it was the first time that I've been able to do that since the pandemic. And while I was there, I brought home a little vintage tool for those who are watching on the YouTubes. I'll put a photo of it on the show notes page. It's a vintage lumber scale as I pass it across because it's like 3 feet long. This one was made by the Lufkin Rule Company from Saginaw, Michigan. And we have a newer one hanging in the studio, and we've had it hanging in the TV studio since the beginning of the TV show. And they're just kind of fun tools to have around, partially because they're ridiculously thin and flexible.
Mm-hmm. They're fun to just whip around.
Right, because it's like, I'm going to break this, but it doesn't. So I just love the way the numbers are etched and stamped on there. Mm-hmm. It's just got I don't even know what that typeface is, but it's sort of my new favorite number typeface. For those who don't know what a lumber scale is, it's used for calculating the board footage of a given board if you were going to buy it at a lumber yard, or for retailers to quickly do that. So it's 50% rule, 50% slide rule, 50% calculator, something like that. So, and I don't know, in the sawmilling world, I feel like there's some other uses, right?
There are, and actually, sorry, I was searching for the exact way to read it, and I just discovered that Woodpeckers has one, or they had one. It was a one-time tool. Missed that boat. Jeez. Yeah, no. in the sawmilling world, there's still a couple companies that make lumber rules like that.
Right.
They make them out of aluminum now, mostly. I think there's probably still some wood ones around, but a lot of them make them out of aluminum. And there's 3 different styles or ways to calculate board feet in a log. John made one called the Dowel scale. There is the international scale, and then there's the Scribner scale, I believe. And it all calculate out volume of lumber in a log. Slightly different, like international scale, I think, favors the seller. Dowel scale favors the buyer a little bit. So a lot of those scales like that on one side will have the standard board measuring, but on the other side will have like log measuring scales. So not only can you like measure the butt end of a log and get a real quick calculation on what board footage is in a log, there's forestry rules, and some of them are hybrids where, you know, you have the board, log, and forestry rule all in one. And there's a very particular, like, you know, you stand 8 feet away from the trunk of a tree, hold it at arm level, and align one end, and it gives you a rough breast height diameter of the tree as it's standing still, which is super cool. I mean, there's all these little neat tricks that like lumber buyers and forest buyers and timber buyers use. But yeah, they use those. I think Bailey's Online sells them still. So kind of cool.
Yeah, we'll put a link for that in the show notes page that goes with today's episode. So it was just whether I end up, taking this to the lumber yard to actually measure out my boards or not, it's still kind of fun to have around the shop as a tool and a little bit of shop art. I'm not opposed to shop art.
How would the guys at the Woodsmith store feel if you brought that in and were measuring out your own board footage? Oh, you can calculate that out right now. I got it.
I got that. Yeah. I got it.
All right.
Yep. Be like one of those guys that walk around like a home center and just gripe about how the sales people don't know what they're talking about. So.
Yeah. So there is Conway Cleveland, I guess, has still makes wood ones.
I think that's the one that we that's the one that we have in the shop, I believe.
It looks like it, yeah. They make those. Those are sold on Bailey's Online. Logrite, who makes a lot of log handling stuff, they make the aluminum ones.
Okay.
And it looks like you have to buy either a Dowel, an International, or a Scribner version of it. But yeah, kind of cool. Tools from years past that are still in use today. It's super fun.
Oh yeah, I love using old tools.
Yeah,
not just for the sake of it, but just because they work.
Yeah. Well, I'm not even gonna say it. Not even gonna say it.
Wow.
No, so on that note, another old tool that really works really well is we were down, 2 weeks ago now? This is your first week back off vacation. So 2 weeks ago, we were down filming an episode of the Woodsmith Shop on the down at our creative director's place on the sawmill. And as often happens in the middle of a log, you find a couple nails. And I had a super cool slide hammer. It was it says Stereotypical on it, but I don't. Or no, I'm sorry. It says Bridgeport. It says Bridgeport on it, but I don't think it's the people that make Bridgeport mills.
Oh, okay.
But it was like, I think Bridgeport, Massachusetts. But it's a nail puller. It's like a slide hammer nail puller. So there's a pincher on one end, and the handle, it's all cast iron. The handle slides back, and then you can pound it into the log, and the head drives down around the nail. And as you use the handle to lever it out, it pinches the head of the nail and pulls it out. I don't know, like, had you ever seen one of those, John, before I pulled that out?
I had not. I mean, the tool looked pretty old, and
yeah,
I have not seen anything like that.
I mean, it just works great. Like those nails we pulled out of the log, we pulled 3 out. We found 3 nails in that log, one board after another, which was really annoying. But it got every one of the nails out, and those were they were long finish nails. They had very small heads on them, so there was nothing really to grab onto. But it worked great. Pulled it right out, especially in wet wood. You know, you're able to kind of get that little pincher head around the nail.
Yeah.
And pull it out.
Yeah, I don't even know what modern tool you would use to do that.
Yeah, the only thing that we've used in the past, my father-in-law calls them cat's paw nail pullers, like the little guys.
Right.
And a lot of the times they're kind of not really sharpened, but they're sharper, and you can kind of pound them in around the nail. But the problem is, most of the time when you do that, you end up with a huge hole in the middle of your log where you're digging this nail out. I mean, not like you're going to use that wood right around the nail anyways, but...
No, but sometimes it just feels weird to make it, like you've essentially blasted it out of your...
Exactly. It's like, let's put some firecrackers in there.
And then you did the redo of the seminar, right?
Yeah, that was a sore subject. I forgot about that, Phil. Thanks for bringing it back up. Forgot about that. Yeah, we had for people that are listening that don't know, we do our Woodsmith seminars. We do them third Thursday of every month. And there are different topics each month, and put on usually by a different person from the staff that kind of has a specialty. So 2 months ago was Steve Johnson talking about carving tools. He does a lot of carving, so he's showing carving tools, basic techniques on carving, and kind of his approach. Then last month, I did one on a logs to lumber, kind of talking about not only breaking down a log into lumber on a sawmill, but how you could do it in your own shop, because a lot of the things I show on the sawmill translate directly to your bandsaw with a smaller size log in the shop. And the one we did on that Thursday, our audio never got turned on. And so nobody could hear anything. Thankfully, when we did it, it was 105 degrees out.
Right.
Like, I'm glad we did it on the hottest day of the year so far. And then we got to the end, and then we saw all the comments saying, hey, we can't hear anything. It's like, oh, no. So just immediately we're like, you know what? We'll redo it. We're going to do it on Monday, 3 days later. And it was like 72 degrees out the next day. It was awesome. So yeah, it went well, though. Didn't find any nails in those logs, thankfully.
There you go. Cool.
So, yeah.
Well, it was fun to try something a little bit different, too, on doing that, because we essentially did a field trip, moving everything outside, and
yeah.
Then John got to experience the walnut dust.
Yeah.
He did, yeah. He wasn't there for the first one.
Yeah. And that's probably why there was problems. You know, it just kind of falls apart when I'm not there. So
I love this. I'm gonna get so many hate comments when this podcast release. Stop playing with the sound effects.
Yeah,
I do it for my own entertainment.
That's okay. We're fueled by the hate.
Yes.
Right.
No, that's something we've talked about for a long time. Is who is it? Is it Jimmy Kimmel that does celebrities reading mean tweets about themselves? We need to do a Woodsmith shop version of that, like reading mean emails about ourselves.
Because people haven't seen us cry.
That would be fun.
No. Usually we'll get like nice letters, occasionally, and it's like, oh, that's nice. But then we'll get like really mean, hateful stuff, and we're like, all right, let's go.
That's what we do it for.
Yeah, this is what drives me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
I'd like to see people actually read their own letters out loud that are like that. Just like, is that how you talk to people?
Well,
unfortunately, it probably is.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because I will be the first one to say that I think we have some of the nicest and most interesting subscribers and listeners. Like you guys know I like to talk. Everybody knows I like to talk. I like to hear people's stories as much. Like, I love stories. I guess that's what the whole thing boils down to. I love stories. So I like talking to people. So we all take turns on these customer service emails for Woodsmith and Pop Wood and stuff. And very often, usually it follows the release of a new issue. Somebody will be working on a project that was shown in that issue. And they will write in. And they will say, hey, I'm working on blah, blah, blah project from the last issue. I'm on page 23, and something's wrong here. Like, I am trying to make this work, and it just is not working. Something is wrong. I need somebody to call me back immediately. I am furious. We have other stuff we're doing, so quite often it's the next day that we call them back. And I don't know how you guys feel, but I would say not even 9 times out of 10, probably 99 times out of 100 that I've gotten those emails and I call them back, the first thing out of their mouths is, hey, I figured it out, I'm an idiot. It's like, no, you just weren't looking at it correctly, and there's probably a reason for that. Let's figure that out. But nine times out of 10 it's like, hey, I overlooked this, and my fault, my bad. It's like, not cool. How's it going? What are you working on right now? How's it going? Send me pictures, and they're always pleasant. Always pleasant.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm the same way when I'm building stuff from plans, and it's like, it's easy to overlook something, and like, what the hell? This is stupid. This is wrong. And
the problem is, it's our plans when we're doing that, John.
Yeah. It's like, who screwed this up, and who do I have to blame and yell at? And then you kind of look through it, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that did make sense.
Yeah.
Or why did they do it this way? This is dumb. And then you do it a different way that you think's better, and then you get to the end and be like, oh I see why they did it. Yeah. Now I'm gonna redo it. So.
I've never done that. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
You have.
Yeah. They're called building pains.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an invitation for anybody listening or watching on YouTube, just to go ahead, rip into us and in the comments, and just let us have it.
Or I'll be the positive one here. Or if you guys love us, let us know that too. I know John needs the feet on the hate, but
that's right. I love
rage
working.
Get hurt.
I'm like the Hulk of woodworking. Just make me mad and turn me loose in the shop.
That's how stuff gets done.
Yep.
Yeah.
So.
We've done, we're human. We make mistakes.
Yep.
And we will try and correct those as soon as we find those, and we apologize for it. But let's be civil.
Right. We're just normal human beings.
Or say it to our faces.
Yeah. Do you want somebody to talk like that to your children or to your significant other?
I do want people to talk like that to my children.
Please put them in their place.
Yeah. So there you go.
This was our best one yet, I think.
Right. Yeah. This one.
They just keep getting better. Everyone.
Just high level. Sometimes you get to the middle of summer.
Man.
Yeah.
I need a vacation.
All right, I think that wraps it up for another episode of the Shop Notes Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or smart remarks about today's episode, you can leave them wherever you find your podcasts, whether it's the Apple iTunes podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can leave comments there or send us an email. It's woodsmith@woodsmith.com. Don't forget to check out our show notes page, woodsmith.com/podcasts, where we'll post some photos and links of the things that we've been talking about on today's episode. Otherwise, we'll see you next week on another episode of the Shop Notes Podcast. Bye, everybody.
This episode of Shop Notes Podcast is brought to you by Woodsmith Plans. You'll find nearly 1,000 plans covering everything that you'd want to build. From furniture projects to gift projects, kitchen accessories, workshop projects, and jigs and more. Find your next project at woodsmithplans.com.